Hey, Browns fans, welcome on in to the Dog Check Podcast, part of the Bleav network of podcasts, also airing weekly on Bally Sports Cleveland. I'm Spencer German, as you know, and it's a big week for the Browns out at training camp as they host the Vikings in Berea for a pair of joint practices. And I have the pleasure this week to be joined by former NFL offensive tackle and former Minnesota Vikings, spent 11 years in the NFL, including 9 with Minnesota, Bryant McKinnie, joining us on the show. He's also a host of the Bleav in Vikings podcast. Bryant, so much. I can't thank you enough for giving us some time this week, my man. And obviously, we got a lot to talk about. The Vikings and Browns kind of squaring off this week.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I spent 12 years, by the way.
No, I got the number wrong. I'm sorry.
That's sorry. Okay. But I'm looking forward to seeing this matchup. One, I know the guys are excited to be able to practice against another opponent besides their teammates every day. So I used to get excited when we would scrimmage against Kansas City, and you got a chance to work on timing and just different things as far as technique against another opponent who's not as familiar with you. So I'm looking forward to that. And then also because Kevin Stefanski, he was like the assistant to our coach, Brad Childress, at the time, and to be able to watch him, elevate to the head coaching job. And I'm pretty sure it's exciting for him as well to go against a team that he used to work for.
So I know your last season was in 2013, and that was you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I was trying to kind of retrace the steps, the origins, if you will, of joint practices. Because when I was younger, I don't always remember these really being a thing. But you're saying during your playing days, you guys did joint practices with Kansas City. It sounds like most notably. Did you feel? Go ahead. I
was going to say, I think a lot of you guys probably didn't know because we didn't have social media like that. You know what I mean? So now everything is pretty much geared around the fans as far as social media, putting out information. But yeah, we definitely had it a few years in a row. I'm going to say 1 year fans probably knew for sure is because we had Brock Lesnar on our team, and he got into the teams got into a scuffle between each other. I think it was the way he tackled somebody, and it caused the team to have a little brawl in training camp. So that was one of the ways. There was a form of news that went out where people kind of knew that they have an inter-squad scrimmage or something going on. But yeah, it's definitely been going on for years.
So I've been sort of taking a straw poll here, people that whether it's former players, current players out in Berea when I'm out covering the Browns, coaches for the Browns right now. Do you feel from your experience, do you get more out of a joint practice than you do a preseason game?
I think so, because, preseason game, you really don't want to make mistakes. And that's really when you're putting everything on film and being evaluated. Where practice is practice, you're being evaluated still, but you can try and test out different things in practice that you probably won't feel comfortable doing in the game. And that's why it's practice. So I think finally getting a chance to go against other people too, you get to unload and you get to cheer for your teammates too. You know what I mean? So you get to unleash on someone else who doesn't know you as well as your teammate who you practice against every day. So to me, I feel like it's better. It's like you just getting somebody new to go against.
Yeah, and I guess off of that, because of how popular I think joint practices have become over the years, and I know Kevin Stefanski talked about this a little bit the other day, how he feels like they get just as much, if not more, work done during these joint practices. Could you see as the NFL schedule evolves and changes, they're going to add an 18th game at some point, we kind of know. Do you think there could be a point where the preseason either ceases to exist or it goes down to just one game and the priority kind of becomes teams doing multiple joint practices this time of year?
I don't really see them eliminating preseason too much because you still have to have film for the guys who are on the bubble of making the team. Some are going to make the team and some are going to get footage from another team that may pick them up if they don't make the current team they're on. So you still need that for some type of evaluation and see how people play game time, because game time situation is different. You have some guys who are great practice players and they don't know how to translate and put it over onto the field when the lights are on. You have some guys who are okay at practice, but then when the lights come on, they turn into a whole different player. Then you have some guys who can do both. So a lot of times coaches want to see how people operate when the lights are on.
Talking with Bryant McKinnie this week on the Dog Check. Appreciate him stopping by. Of course, former NFL offensive tackle. I want to start specific to the Vikings because we got the big news this week, Bryant, about J.J. McCarthy and the meniscus injury that he has that's now going to obviously have him miss an extended period of time here. tough blow for the Vikings, especially in a year where I think fans kind of understand where they're at, sort of a rebuilding type year. You get a new quarterback in here with Kirk Cousins leaving. How disappointing is that, and what's kind of the reaction been from your perspective to that McCarthy injury?
It's a little disappointing, a minor setback. Luckily, it's early in the season, so I know those type of injuries. I've had a meniscus tear twice, actually, and I know they take about 4 to 6 weeks to come back from. So he'll just have to do a lot of rehabbing, and like I said, at least it's earlier in the season, so he can still get back on track and make it, to eventually become a starter if possible this season. So I'm glad it's earlier on, and then instead of in the middle of the season. But I feel like he was doing a great job. I mean, he started off last week, he threw an interception, but then he came back with 2 touchdown passes, and was able to bounce back. And that just showed me a lot in him, because I like to see how when people, aren't successful at the beginning, how do they recover or bounce back? And I feel like he did a great job doing that.
You mentioned that you had that same injury multiple times in your career.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned sort of the timeline of how long it takes, but what is that process like as you deal with an injury like that? Sort of more serious, maybe not quite the scale of the ACLs and an Achilles tear or something like that truly does like end your season. You're not playing until next year.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the recovery like for that, and sort of the mental battle that you have to kind of work through as well to get back from something like that?
So yeah, 4 to 6 weeks, and some people just from surgery sometimes can mentally take a little longer just because they're scared to hurt it again, but you have to kind of get that out of your head. But really, if he just focuses time on rehabbing, just make sure he just stays on top of his rehab, because you want to keep your full range of motion. You don't want any anything to slow it down. So you want to keep your full range of motion, but focus on your rehab and just do everything you can do to strengthen it as well.
Talk with Bryant McKinnie on the show this week. Appreciate you guys jumping on in with us. More specific to the Browns, Bryant, they have an interesting situation kind of brewing as far as their tackle spots are concerned, because they had this young phenom in Dwan Jones who kind of burst onto the scene last year, had a really good year. But they have a veteran in Jack Conklin who's been great for them when healthy, who's coming back from a knee injury, and we don't know what his status is for the start of the season. Jedrick Wills, the first round draft pick of Andrew Berry's tenure here in Cleveland. He's coming back from a knee injury as well. And there's all these kind of moving parts, right? 3 guys for 2 spots right now without Conklin and Wills out there. Jones is sort of slotted in as that starting right tackle, and there's been some guys rotating in practice at the left tackle spot. But I'm kind of curious, because they view Dwan Jones as the future at that position in some capacity. But I've also kind of floated this idea of, like, once Jack Conklin's back, could you see him move to the other side of the offensive line, to the spot where you played at left tackle? How difficult is it for a player to make that adjustment or make that shift if they're more accustomed to playing on the right side and they're asked to move to the left side, or vice versa? For me, I mean, I learned it in junior college, learned how to play offensive line in junior college, and it was the left side. So I wasn't left-handed, so I had to get used to doing everything out of a left-handed stance. And then once I got so comfortable with it, it was just like kind of, for me, it felt weird trying to go on the opposite side. I would do it in practice, try to play around and see, and I just didn't feel as comfortable. So I always would rather stay, where I felt more comfortable and felt like I would be more effective at. I just remember, like, even going to Baltimore, and Ray Lewis asked me to come to Baltimore, and I was like, well, y'all got a left tackle, a whole movie behind The Blind Side, so what do we want to do? I made it very clear I'm not playing right tackle, especially at that point in my career. I think it was like year 10 or 11. Like, so I just didn't feel like I was wanted to switch at that late in my career. And then he ended up moving over. Michael Orr ended up moving over. He didn't mind it. But it can, for some people, I mean, if they're used to flip-flopping on both sides, but I was on one side the whole time, so it was just a little different. Talking with Bryant McKinnie on the show. You've seen the evolution of offensive linemen, I think, from over time, and it's interesting. They used to sort of be a different physique and a different style of play, and now I think today there's the way they play, the style of play of football in college, makes it sometimes a little bit harder for guys to adjust to the NFL. What do you think is the most important thing for players who are sort of making that adjustment to be able to succeed at the NFL level, especially with the way the game is played today, very pass heavy, all these different things?
Yeah, the NFL started becoming really pass heavy, and they started being like, as far as run blocking, it was more about cutting off and things like that. So my era was more like downhill, like and smash mouth type of thing. So I feel like they should get back to that, because I feel like some of these defensive linemen were becoming more downhill, and you know what I mean? So like your guy, Myles Garrett, and, you know, even people like Aaron Donald and people, like they were becoming seem like more aggressive, you know, on offensive linemen. So I feel like they need to get back to that, where they're just running the ball. I feel like Philly was doing a good job of just taking the ball and shoving it down your throat. And I feel like get back to that, because that's kind of more of offensive line play.
I feel like every time I have a guest on, I got to ask him about Deshaun Watson. We know everything he's obviously gone through off the field, that whole ordeal. We know about the injury he's coming back from to the shoulder this year. Stake your claim, Bryant. Do you still see or believe that Deshaun Watson can get back to being that player that he used to be in Houston, or do you think that ship has sailed on that player specifically?
To me, it's all about his mentality, and how, you know, how he views himself. Like, I feel like we can't really predict like how he feels or think. So it's really about him and how he, you know, does he want to prove people wrong? What is he using as his motivation? You know what I'm saying? So if like I want to come back and prove people wrong, I'm gonna go out here and give you know, my effort as far as rehab and just go out here and have a great season. So it's really up to him and his mindset.
Talking with Bryant McKinnie, former NFL offensive tackle, on the Dog Check. This feels like a good place to remind you guys, as always, to like, follow, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. And of course, we're always airing weekly on Bally Sports Cleveland. Some good commentary going on here as we get you ready for a busy week. Browns joint practices, and of course, the game against the Vikings in that second preseason game. Along the lines of Deshaun Bryant, we talk a lot about like reps with him and just how many of those he needs before the season starts. The last 2 years, there's been, you know, this kind of, people have kind of given the benefit of the doubt and said like, hey, he's got to shake off the rust a little bit when the season begins. But I kind of am at a point now where it's like, listen, you're in year 3. You just saw Joe Flacco come in and, you know, off the couch last year, and there was no questions about Russ with him. He was slinging it around the football field. So I kind of need him to hit the ground running this year. How many reps do you think is like an appropriate amount? Or does it, I mean, maybe it varies per player, but what do you think is kind of the appropriate amount of reps that a guy needs in the preseason or during joint practices to feel like they're truly ready for the start of the season?
I feel like they shortened the preseason anyway for his game wise. So I feel like 2 preseason games can give them a good idea. You know, and then, you know, they have all those practices leading up to them. So I feel like 2 preseason games, because I mean, quarterbacks need to understand like timing and everything else with their receivers and running backs as well, like handing off the ball. So it's about timing for them, and just seeing different looks. So I feel like 2 preseason games is enough.
Brian, I appreciate you giving us some time this week, man. I have a few more things for you, obviously, before we get out of here. But I wanted to ask specifically about, you mentioned earlier in the show, Kevin Stefanski and his relationship with the Vikings organization. Mm-hmm. Part of why they were invited, obviously, into town this week to participate in these joint practices and kind of do this arrangement together. Just what do you remember distinctly about as you followed this organization, about Kevin's time in Minnesota, and how was he kind of regarded kind of coming up through the ranks before he took the Browns job?
Well, it was good to see and hear him getting that job, just because I knew he was like Coach Brad Childress, like assistant. I knew he like would help with the cards on like the scout team and things like that. He kind of did a little bit of everything. So to see him like, you know, kind of graduate and keep moving up, and now as a head coach is, you know, I'm happy for him. So he was always a cool and nice guy. You know, he was, you know, of course he was younger back then, but he was a cool, nice guy, and, you know, everybody pretty much got along with him.
Do you think he obviously the resume speaks for itself at this point. He's got the 2 Coach of the Year awards already at this point in his tenure since he came to Cleveland, all this. But do you think he is on the same, you know, the same level as some of these great offensive minds that we talk about around football? You know, the Kyle Shanahans, these new innovators, the Sean McVays, because we always have those conversations. Like, both those coaches were on his schedule last year. They played the NFC West, and we talked a lot about how this is kind of his chance to prove like he's in that same class with those guys and the schematically what they do. And he is kind of this offensive mind that people will have hold in high regard. So do you think he's at least at this point kind of ascended to that same plateau where he's right up in that conversation with those guys?
I think he's working his way up there in that conversation. Have a couple more successful seasons, especially on offense, and I think he'll definitely start being in the talks even more.
As you look at around the NFL, AFC North, obviously one of the most competitive divisions in football. Last year, Ravens win the division. Lamar Jackson gets the MVP, but you had 3 teams in that division make the playoffs. There was a case that the fourth could have if Joe Burrow maybe didn't get hurt, or if he had stayed on the field a little bit longer and helped him win a couple more games. As you look at that division this year, still understanding the gauntlet that it is, are the Ravens, in your mind, a team that you obviously played for late in your career, are they still the team to beat in that division?
I think so, just because they added a veteran running back in Henry onto the team. I think that Jackson has probably learned from the AFC Championship game to stay within his game. So I feel like it was a lot of learning experiences in that loss. And I think they're going to come back and try to, compete to get to a Super Bowl. And it's in New Orleans. That's where we played the last Super Bowl.
That's a good connection right there. That's right.
Right.
As you staying with the division for a second, though, if you had to pick a team of the other 3, Browns, Bengals, Steelers, who do you think is best equipped this year to potentially dethrone the Ravens?
The thing about it is with football is I always try to tell people it really looks like you got to see how people are looking in December, because there's so many things that could take place during the course of the year as far as injury and things like that, where some of your key players might be missing. But on paper, I mean, Cincinnati can give them trouble. I feel like anybody can really give them trouble in the division. And plus, I feel like once you're playing against somebody in the division, it's a tougher and harder game too, because they're in your division, so it's a harder battle. So it's like each game you have to go in there with a certain mindset, and that's a tough division.
You know how those AFC North games go. Do you consider the Browns at this point, as we talk about teams that are threats to the Ravens, do you consider them a Super Bowl contender if they get consistent quarterback play from Deshaun Watson?
Because I feel like they have a great defense, so I feel like if they get good quarterback play, then they can definitely take a shot at the playoffs. Like, you can't really say they're exempt at all. I mean, they've definitely made a big turnaround, because to me, I feel like my era when I was playing, the Browns were kind of like how Detroit was back then too. You know what I mean? And both teams have now made a turnaround and are becoming like these teams that are to be reckoned with. So, yeah, I definitely see the potential in them too, just get good quarterback play, because they have a great defense.
And I guess last thing on the front of the division, what do you make of the Steelers and what they did at the quarterback position this offseason, revamping that room entirely, and how much of a threat does that make them? They're always going to be in the mix with Mike Tomlin, as we know.
Yeah, they're going to be in the mix. I feel like their defense has been kind of keeping them in the mix. We really have to see just how well these quarterbacks play, because I'm not familiar. So just see how, and that, on offense, it's about gelling. That means you need all 11 guys to be on the same page at one time, where defense is like 9 guys can miss an assignment, 1 can get an interception or a sack, and it's a big play. So you just got to see how the offense all kind of gels behind this new quarterback.
Let's flip to the NFC North real quick. We know there's some really good quarterbacks in this division, obviously, that the Vikings are going to have to face this year. Do you think the Bears have finally found their franchise quarterback that has eluded them for so many years in Caleb Williams?
I think so. I think this is a young kid that's excited to be in the NFL, and I think he's going to do a pretty good job. And I do feel like that the Bears have struggled in this quarterback position for some reason for some years, but they may have finally found their quarterback. I feel like he had a good opening season, preseason game the other week, and I feel like he's not trying to let himself down either. So I think he'll go out here and give it his all.
Would you say the Vikings fan base considers the Packers their biggest rival in the division?
I do. I think the Packers first, and then just because of the long history between the two. And then I feel like the Bears, Detroit, I feel like they're still getting used to Detroit, like being on the rise and being, because Detroit right now is definitely going to be one of your teams, to look out for like a Super Bowl run. Detroit just has to be aware that now everybody's going to play their best game against Detroit because of how far they went. So that's the thing, is when you go far in these playoffs, teams, when they see you on the schedule now, you become a target, where Detroit before was under the radar. It was slowly building up, but now you're going to be a target. So we'll see how they do the season. If they do good this season, then they're pretty legit to me. But yeah, definitely Green Bay has always been like the main rival, just because both teams have always been like the 1 and 2 in the division. And you had the Bears, creeping there every once in a while too. But now everybody's trying. Well, now if you look at it, they're trying to act like Minnesota's at the bottom of the division.
Yeah,
we're not seeing some things. So we'll see how this all plays out.
Along those lines, how frustrating is it for Vikings fans that the Packers just seem to pass the torch from one quarterback to another? You go Favre to Rodgers, now to Jordan Love. I mean, there's like no team in NFL history has had this much success drafting quarterbacks, it seems.
Right. And what's crazy is, like, Minnesota, we haven't had the best success either with our quarterbacks, from Christian Ponder to Teddy Bridgewater, who ended up with an injury. Like, so we haven't had the best either. We came and got, as far as drafting, we got Kirk Cousins from, the Commanders or whatever.
Yeah.
But we haven't honestly had the best at drafting quarterbacks. So hopefully JJ McCarthy can, turn that around for us.
All right. Well, speaking of the Vikings and your playing days there, we know that you had a chance to play, obviously, with Brett Favre towards the tail end of his career there, and you guys made that run to the NFC Championship game. First of all, I want to know what it was like blocking and protecting Brett Favre on the left side of that offensive line when you were there.
It was a great experience. And then the fact that we got a chance to get to know him was even better, just because some people, in the media would make it seem like he was like this diva, when it was totally the opposite. And I feel like the team actually rallied around him and played at a higher level just because they didn't want to let him down. So, like, I always say, you have certain people who makes everyone else elevate. Like a Tom Brady, when he went to Tampa Bay, he made that whole team elevate. You have like a Ray Lewis. Like, some people just don't want to let certain guys, certain legends down. And Brett Favre had that impact on the Vikings. That was the best record that I had as a Viking, which was 12-4 that season. And that was the furthest I ever made it to at the time, was to the NFC Championship. And to have 5 turnovers and still lose by a sudden death field goal, was like, that was good for us.
I was going to follow up with some sort of along those lines. Do you blame Brett or AP more for losing that game? Because AP fumbled on the 1-yard line that game, but then we know Brett for the interception
I
in
overtime.
Remember
that, like, going in, it was like the 1 or 2 yard line, and it was a fumble. But there was, outside them, there was 3 other fumbles too that kind of killed the momentum. So it's like, I can't even blame them. It's a team effort. We just need to eliminate so many mistakes. But to have those 5 different turnovers and still be just a field goal away, just kind of hurt a little bit more. And the Super Bowl was in Miami that year too, so I really wanted to go and play, because I came from the University of Miami, so that would have been great. But yeah, I mean, that was a great season though for us overall.
Well, and then you ended up getting, obviously, a Super Bowl with the Ravens later on the back end of it. And I mentioned Joe Flacco, obviously, who was in Cleveland last year. What was it like being part of that run where you got a quarterback who's just like on an absolute heater and leads you to that game, and then you guys get the job done in New Orleans there?
That game was about everybody being focused. I remember the year before, we were 12-4 that year, my first year in Baltimore. We made it to the AFC Championship, and we lost to New England. I remember Ray Lewis was supposed to retire that year, and I remember him being in the locker room and said, "Oh, don't hold your head low. We had a great season. We'll be in the same position next year." I'm thinking to myself, 1, what are the odds of us being in the same position next year? And then 2, you must not be retiring. So lo and behold, we were in that same position after we got past Denver. Rest in peace to Jacoby Jones, but Flacco with the pass to Jacoby, and that put us in position to win the game. And here we are in the same position, but this time we, had learned from that experience and that feeling of, seeing them celebrate and go, so we didn't want to be denied this time. And then at this point, it's myself and Ed Reed. It's our 11th season. You know what I'm saying? We won the national championship together in college. Now, like, come on, this is year 11. Like, we don't have too many opportunities at this. So we were able to pull through.
Did you guys buy the conspiracy theories that the NFL turned the lights out on purpose in that game? So to let the 49ers come back in?
That went on with that because what's the odds? Like, it's the Super Bowl. We didn't kind of have all this like covered, like the lights went out. And we had like at least a 3-touchdown lead at that time too, because Jacoby had just scored. He just ran back the kickoff, and then that put defense on the field. So the defense was like maybe on the 50-yard line somewhere, because their offense was driving. And then the lights went out. So that's over an hour because halftime was 30 minutes. And then offense never touched the field. And then the lights was out for another 30 minutes. So it's over an hour of offense not even touching the field or doing anything. And offense, I told you, is all about rhythm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So kind of can lose your rhythm, and then now it becomes like a 5-point game, a 3-point game from being up 3 touchdowns. We went from like dominating to like at this point like trying to hang on.
We need a 30 for 30 on how that all went down because I agree.
Right. I mean, we try to blame Beyonce at the beginning because he used a lot of the power, but I mean, at the end of the day, somebody didn't feel like they liked the way the game was going.
Something was suspect about that one.
But they made it more entertaining because it became a nail biter.
We, as fans, we enjoyed it, that's for sure. He's Bryant McKinnie, again, former NFL offensive tackle, spent some time with the Minnesota Vikings, which is why we had him on this week over the course of his 12-year career, which is why we had him on this week because, as you know, Browns, Vikings square off for their second preseason game, and they have some joint practices going on during the week. Bryant, I can't thank you enough, man. Hope we get a chance to chop it up sometime in the near future. But best of luck to you, and let's hope we catch up down the road, man.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
That's going to do it for another episode of The Dog Check. As always, for our listeners and viewers of this program, just to remind you to like, follow, subscribe, and review The Dog Check podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're part of the Bleav network of podcasts, and we also air weekly on Bally Sports Cleveland. Until next time, enjoy the Browns' upcoming preseason game. I'll talk to you guys next week. And as always, go Browns.